Mirz Hashem, in this shir, I'd like to do very different than we did last week. Last week we took a look at the larger picture of what freedom is about and touched on some parts of the Haggadah. Today, I'd like to take a look at one specific part of the Haggadah, try to analyze what message it is trying to convey to us, and in so doing, perhaps get a deeper sense of some of the major focuses of the night of Seder. At the beginning of the Haggadah, we have the Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves to Paro in Egypt. And at the end of that paragraph in source 1a, it tells us that we are obligated, even if we were all men of wisdom, understanding, experience, and knowledge of the Torah, it would still be an obligation upon us to tell about the exodus from Egypt. The more one tells, the more he is praiseworthy. Then the Haggadah gives us an immediate example. And it's this example that I'd like to focus in on today. It happened that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining in Bnei Brak. They discussed the Exodus all that night until their students came and said to them, "Our rabbis, our teachers, it is daybreak, time for the reading of the morning Shema." And then the Haggadah goes on to say, the idea of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was, Hareani kiven shivim shana, v'lo zachiti shetamar Yitziat Mitzrayim b'leilos. I didn't know that we have an obligation to speak about Yitziat Mitzrayim at night, ad shedrasha ben Zoma, until Ben Zoma came with a drasha of kol yemei chayecha, the kol including the leilos, including the night, the entirety of your day. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of this story of these 5 rabbis reclining at the Seder in Bnei Brak? What is the Haggadah trying to teach us by this story? What is significance likewise in that the students come and tell their teacher, the time has come, daybreak has come, the time has come to recite the Shema. So the approach, and the most basic approach, is that the Shalal Rav brings in source 2, and then a second approach in source 3. In source 2, he enumerates each one of the rabbis as having the qualities of Kulam Chachamim, of Yeduim, of Nevonim. Each of these rabbis had one of these qualities. And you see that although these rabbis had these great qualities, and they were very knowledgeable and very immersed in Torah learning, nonetheless, they spent the entire night learning. How much more so we, who are not on that level, have the obligation. Similar but slightly different, what we learn from this story is that these rabbis either were from the Kohen or Levi, from Shevet Levi, who were not enslaved, or Rabbi Akiva was Ben Gerim, he was the son of converts, so his forefathers were not in Egypt. And nonetheless, although their forefathers were not actually enslaved in Egypt, they are retelling the story. How much more so our forefathers who were enslaved in Egypt, we have the obligation to tell the story. So what we see here is really a continuation of the first paragraph. The obligation to tell over the story includes everyone, even the greatest of all men, even if one's ancestors were not found in Mitzrayim as slaves. Nonetheless, the obligation is upon all of us to tell over the story, and that's a demonstration immediately where the Haggadah is coming to teach us. Obviously, there's a lot more found here. The Chazon L'Moed in source number 4 notes the following. He says, She'ein lismoch al chokhmah ela yesh l'saper sipur hamevi lemunah chushit. What this story is teaching us is that no matter how wise a person may be, one does not rely on their wisdom, but rather one needs to tell over the story over and over again in order to create a real live emunah, an emunah that you can really feel. And yesh l'arbot b'sipur, and one should, as these rabbis did, spend all night speaking, because the Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim, this story, has within it the fundamentals of emunah, the fundamentals of Jewish faith. And this is Siftei Chaim in source number 5. Continuing this theme, says the following. He says, if you take a look at this story, all we find are these 5 rabbis. Their students come later in the morning. And therefore there was nobody there who you had to tell the story to, because everyone there knew the story. They are great chachamim. Nonetheless, v'afal pikein, in the arrow in 5, heirichu hachachamim latzman b'sipor yitzat Mitzrayim. Nonetheless, they spent the whole night telling the story. And the obvious question is, what was the necessity in doing this when they obviously did not learn anything new to what they already knew? And this brings us to the first real understanding of what this story is coming to teach us. Explains the Siftei Chaim, continuing Rav Friedlander in source 9, quoting Rav Simcha Zissel Mikel. Agada tells us one of the hardest jobs that we have on the Seder night is Chayav Adam Lirot et Atzmo Kilu Hu Yatzam Mitzrayim. Person is obligated to see themselves as if they left Egypt. Well, that's a very hard thing. That a person should feel this emotional connection, this emotional jubilation, that we've left Egypt. Therefore we have to give thanks. That's a very